All right. So, Michael, you and I are here today to talk about like you had actually said something that I found very interesting, and I kind of wanted to have a conversation about that. Do you want to kind of like try to like re-summarize like what it was you were saying and kind of like set up the framing for what we're going to talk about?
Yeah, I'll probably do a bad job. I'm a horrible storyteller and horrible at condensing things. But I was responding to something that Sherry had said, but she was trying to make the case, I guess, that the universalist perspective of things actually places more responsibility on the individual rather than less. What's up, Jess?
I see Jess is joining us. Hey, yeah, perfect timing. We like Michael was just getting into like framing the conversation. Like, did you hear Michael's message that kind of like became like the spur for this, Jess?
Yeah, I got the message and then I just clicked on the link, even though I'm like just walking around on my phone. So, I don't know. It just got to the
So,
point in the afternoon where I had to go on a walk. Did
oh,
you
it's
guys
great.
start
Yeah, it
yet?
looks weather looks really beautiful there.
It's like 80 degrees.
Oh my
Wow.
goodness. Yeah. Well, that's that. Yeah, it looks really nice. So yeah, you were just in time. Was just kind of getting into to setting up and kind of framing the conversation. So we'll let him go ahead and
Okay, good.
continue. Go. So Michael, go ahead.
Yeah,
Pick
so I
up.
Sorry to
was
interrupt you.
oh,
No,
no
don't worry
worries.
about it. No, it's perfect. We're glad to have you here.
So I was just talking about my response to what Sherry was saying, which is that the universalist perspective. Some people I've noticed they have a kind of reaction to it of like, okay, that's like cheap, easy grace, and I I found when in the moments where I find it persuasive and like beautiful that it's not there's nothing easy about it. It kind of demands a certain responsibility on every individual suddenly. Like it suddenly ups the ante because I think in the traditional kind of worldview of modern Protestant Christianity, you have like kind of a winners and losers game. And so anybody that kind of falls outside of so essentially what you like you can always make excuses for why you don't have to die to yourself on behalf of somebody else because you can just kind of place them on the loser team and they're like, well, they're not real, like in a certain sense they don't become real people then because they're like, okay, they're going to hell and they're going to get theirs soon. Like there's just in so much of that just happens. Like I don't even think anybody says that, but it's kind of the assumed reality of American Protestant Christianity because there's just something very competitive and divisive about like being the best and having, being the most doctrinally sound and knowing the Bible more than everybody else, or just like there's just all these kind of like purity tests that are very competitive in nature. Whereas I don't know, this alternative perspective for me, like it actually, I don't know, it I see it like, well in my Vox I was talking about Dostoevsky and how this is like a reoccurring theme in his works. And there's this the most famous one is probably in Brothers Karamazov, where Father Zosima like has this, not only like in his actions in the story, but also he has like this kind of like spiel where he talks about like the purpose of the monk is to see himself as being responsible for the whole state of the world. And that somehow in coming into contact with the reality of that, like somehow you get in touch with the love of God for the world, and like that changes everything. So I know that was, like I said, I'm a horrible condenser and summarizer. But
Yeah, one of the
how
things
did
I
that
thought
land?
of when you were saying that is like I don't know, like apparently, and I'm not Orthodox, so I may not get the details of this correct, but is my understanding that that in Orthodox countries, um, there have been times in the past when Orthodox countries have gone to war, and the entire country has been excommunicated as long as the war is ongoing, because the war is seen as a failure.
Mm-hmm.
the fact that that war has happened is seen as a failure of the church, which I like. There's something right about that I like. Where I would say now it's also been the Orthodox practice to view it as a mandate for you to serve in the war if your country goes to war. And that's the part where I would say that's probably a little. I would not affirm that. I would say that's probably that seems to contradict the. To me, that seems to contradict the first part, and so I don't, So, but yeah, I really was. I'm gonna talk about Sherry's dream, even though she's not here to talk about it. I'm just gonna steal Sherry's dream because it was so on point to what you're talking about. Because we were in the conversation that I had yesterday with Sherry and James about hierarchy of heaven and earth. At one point in the conversation, Sherry shared this dream that she had where she dreamed of herself like at the judgment seat, and she was like looking down, like all she could see were like the feet, right? She couldn't see anything but the feet. And but she says she didn't feel nervous at all. She wasn't afraid of being judged. And then she looked behind her, and there were just like billions and billions of people like behind her. And then somehow like she felt afraid because she felt that she was in some way responsible for all of that mass of people behind her. And then I read there's a part of of chapter 8, which is one of the chapters we were discussing, where the very conclusion of the section that I read from the book, Harding says, for after all, there is only ever one man. Like he was pointing to, so Sherry's dream like resonated with the text we were reading, where it was pointing toward that, yes, we are individual persons whose personhood is defined by our relationality, but at the same time there's a non-trivial unity to that as well, or there ought to be anyway. So that I was thinking of that when you were talking.
Yeah, that's really good. This idea of the connectedness of all things, I think that's what really has struck me, is just and there's this great, I think it's God in Doc, or it's a collection of essays by C.S. Lewis, and it's called
God in the Doc
Glory.
is the larger volume that Mere Christianity is kind of like a condensed version of.
Yeah, and then there's like this specific essay called The Weight of Glory, and in it he gets to some point where he's talking about the kind of like, he's like, we think that like culture and language and all these things are permanent, but it's more like people are the permanent things, and that like that we're all in like little ways and big ways, we're moving each other towards these sort of like final states of like something that we would recognize now is like, I don't know, almost like a god,
right? And that seems resonant to me, because that relates directly to the real status of creation, because we're in a state of becoming. Like transformation and evolution is just part of what's going on. So in a way that like there that really isn't fixed. So in a very non-trivial way, like who you perceive yourself to be in the moment, or like the physical status of like a given object, are far less real and enduring than the relational bonds between persons and things. Like that is the thing that gives, actually, like I think I said something earlier this morning. I think to text. I don't think I left a voice. But when I was making coffee this morning, I was actually thinking about that like it's actually like the more relational something is, the more real it is. So I
But you could say it's definitely more central,
what do you
right?
tell me what you mean by central?
Well, I don't know. But I like as soon as you said relational, I just have like a picture of a circle, and obviously
Right. Okay.
that as you get towards the center is in contact. Well, it plays a sort of, I don't know. I wanted to say it plays a greater sacrificial role in terms of keeping it together, and it's more connected. But then I don't even know if that's true. But that's what popped into my head.
Okay. That's interesting. I'm trying to. Okay, so greater sacrificial role. I like that. How does that relate to the? Can you explain to me how that relates to the image of the circle and like the spatial aspect you were talking about?
Not really, because I don't I like when I'm thinking about something I don't understand, I'll have like these sort of images that like just seem to me very intuitive, and like they just mean something to me, but like I'm not sure exactly why. But I think, again, in some sense, like the reason Jesus is the center of things is because of that willingness to die to himself. And that's like, for the joy set before him, he endures the cross. But it's and there's something about the holding of things together. Like, and you were saying earlier today in one of your boxes, like, like you have to have, we need this space, we need this sort of ability to freely choose, or it's not really love, right? So
Right.
and that space that gets created it's the space for all this mess. And
Right.
so, but then there's the verse about, how love can cover a multitude of sins. So like,
Mhm.
there's like, love is like the thing that like is able to heal and bring that all back together. So it gives the space for the prodigal son to go away, but also is able to bring him back into the fold afterwards.
Right, and I think that's connected to the thing that I've been talking about lately, where it's like I've always understood that, like, um because love cannot be coerced, like, freedom is a necessary precondition for the love to even be a possibility.
Yeah.
Right? There's no such thing as a coerced love. It's not love. It's coerced. So there has to be, and if Luke were here, I'm sure he'd be shouting libertarian freedom. And yes, libertarian freedom isn't actually freedom. We could both agree with that. Only love is actually freedom. Yet at the same time, non-coercion is a precondition for that possibility of that love, which does in fact lead to true freedom.
Yeah.
So
what's the libertarian freedom? How's that differ? I never understood.
it's negative freedom. It's negative freedom. It is freedom from coercion. Now, I would deny it as having any real value in its positive expression of freedom to do whatever I want. That's just a sure route to slavery. But negative freedom, freedom from coercion, is in fact a precondition for love to even possibly exist. So, and libertarian freedom takes negative freedom as its starting point. So, although we certainly wouldn't want to, as Christians, to affirm libertarian freedom as anything other than a sure path to slavery, if pursued for its own sake, the negative freedom from coercion is a necessary precondition for love to even be possible. So that much I've always kind of understood to be the case. But what I've been starting to think lately is that suffering is also a precondition for love to be a possibility. Because, and I don't know if I know how to articulate that. It's just something that
I've thought the same thing, and here's how I would articulate it. I'll see if this sits well with you. I would say love doesn't exist without self-sacrifice.
Right.
And if there is no and self-sacrifice is kind of meaningless if there isn't some sort of actual real cost or price attached to it.
Right. So there has to be a sacrifice.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
So
not,
if you
a sacrifice isn't a sacrifice unless it's a sacrifice.
well, this is why I get into the divine impassibility. Why I have problems
Right.
with that, because I'm like,
Right.
okay, it's this weird kind of thing where it's like, okay, God pours out from himself, but it doesn't cost him anything, because he just, he can, in our conversation, me and Luke were talking about this, like, it's sort of like, quantitative easing, where God conjures up $1 million, redemption dollars to pay himself back for
Right.
something. And it's just kind of like a fictional currency like thing that's like, okay,
Right.
now I paid myself back, and look what I did for all you guys. Out of my
Right. Yeah, that's
infinite,
not. Yeah. Right.
generosity. Like
Yeah.
I made this fictional currency that I gave myself, and now I've paid for all your sins. Go me.
Yeah.
Like it just like it doesn't resonate to anything
Because you
when God
lose.
is
Right.
yeah.
Right. Because like you have to like I don't know. To me, at some point, you have to accept that in a way that, well, maybe God doesn't need anything. Like God is sufficient unto himself. God is nonetheless vulnerable, and does desire to have his love reciprocated, and that can only be, and the necessary conditions for that, I would say, are both negative freedom and suffering. And I don't see any possibility for that to be otherwise. Now let me just, okay, not I don't, this may seem like a weird transition, but let me just bounce this off you. I was watching Burn Power's video on Rookmarker's take on reality. And like I actually really liked the first 45 minutes of it. Like I noticed that Luke commented in the Discord that I didn't think highly of it, but that's kind of not true. I actually thought there was a lot to be said for it. I think that it started to break down the more Rookmacher started leaning into his Reformed theology. It kind of caused his thinking about particularly about participation to break down.
It just got flat.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It got flat.
Yeah, right. It got flat. Yes, like, exactly. It got flat because he recognized. Here's what it was. It's like, I have diagnosed the problem, but I am not going to acknowledge how my own theology is part of the problem, and don't really have a solution.
Yeah.
Like it's like, okay, like Reformed theology is part of the problem you're diagnosing here. It's like, if you don't think Reformed theology increases withdrawal of participation,
yeah,
you're crazy. But he doesn't see withdrawal of participation as necessarily the problem.
Yeah, he clearly didn't read Barfield. Well,
he did, but he took what he wanted.
Yeah,
which is funny because he talks about how like you see what you know.
Yeah.
And he's demonstrated the truth of that.
Right. Like, well, he was condemning modernity, but he didn't realize that the role the Reformation played in that.
In creating modernity. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, particularly Calvin's theology to me is like, he has the right start date. I mean, he indicates that it started to go off the rails in the early 14th century, like right around the year 1300. I'm with him there. He points out that in that early modern period is when it starts to get worse, but he doesn't recognize the role that Calvinist theology played in the deepening of that withdrawal of participation. That's a little bit of a sidetrack, but the part that but anyway, but I did like it on the whole, despite the fact that I thought he diagnosed the problem that he had no solution for, and his blindness to a proper Christian sense of participation is where he fell short specifically. But early on in that video, when he was talking about like tourism, which Byrne talks about often, it made me think about something where he talks about how like people just used to go to the same place like every year, and now like people travel like thousands of miles and all that. But then there was a discussion about like how intimately people used to get to know particular places because of that older pattern. Mm-hmm. And while I was thinking of that, Luke's joining us. While I was thinking about that, I was thinking about Eden, because if you think about Eden, like it has this strange quality of like it seems to be connected temporally to eternity. Right. But in terms of its geographical space, it's not much. It's small, and it seems small. It's a very contained space, and yet at the same time, it's connected to eternity. It's so connected to eternity that that many Orthodox Jews use Gan Eden as a name for the afterlife, right? So it's closely connected to eternity temporally, but it's this really small geographical space. So actually, after the fall, we lose that contact with eternity, but space opens up. So I think it seems to me, it seems natural for withdrawal to continue opening up that space even more. But at the same time, maybe we're even losing more of a sense of eternity. And the thing is like both Christians and Jews are looking forward to Olam Haba, to the repair of the world. So that repair of the world involves like bringing that eternity that we had in Eden back, but now that eternity that was limited, that was spatially limited in the beginning, now encompasses the entire cosmos. So eternity and space are joined together.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like that this interplay between time and space is a big feature of in the Emil Bach's book too. And
yes, which is
but
this is what made me. That's what made me think about it. Yeah, if I hadn't been reading Bach, like I probably that is probably what helped me make that little connection. I'm like, oh, okay, there's something being said here about this meeting of eternity and space.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and I think something's interesting going on there. But like for me, like I have a hard time imagining how it's even possible for us to have meaningful things to say about eternity. Like it feels to me like a sort of that Sarah Coakley, she's an analytical theologian, and she says her interest in analytical theology is about trying to get more precise about the things we can say and the things we can't. And for me, that's something that's becoming more and more clear, is that the move to try and speak from the perspective of eternity is also a move to try and usurp God and stand in his place in some sense. And I think that in some sense that when the objective point of view pretends to sort of stand in that place, like it is and I think it's useful that like Paul talks about the monarchical vision. I think that's what it's trying to do. And so I think I think we maybe underestimate the degree to which God is committed to time, and that these sort of this, I don't know, because the end state of all of this is a union between the creation and God. And that I think that forever changes. There's a real cost to God in that process that is forever altering.
I would say that definitely eternity is beyond our rational comprehension, for sure. Let's like if you look at I mean, like the only when we talk about the infinite, for example, we can only talk about it apophatically. Like the word infinite is just it's an apophatic statement, but not finite. We have no idea what the infinite is. I would say that eternity is the same thing. It's but the reason we have a word for it, is even though we can't rationally comprehend it, we intuitively anticipate it. We see flashes of it. It's like this. We have like these little flashes and glimpses of it, like through I would say our spiritual senses, that let us know it's there, even though we can't like give a rational accounting of it. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, I've never heard an account of it that made any sense to me, because I think, I don't know, maybe I have a very flat understanding of it.
No,
but like when I hear it, I think of something that's, when I hear eternal, it connects me to this idea of divine impassibility and a sort of stasis of like, okay, we've reached the perfect end goal and now no change. We lock it in.
Right. Oh, so you think it's like so you have like this association of stasis?
Right. This
See,
is why
to me,
why
I don't.
why
Now okay, so I don't associate with stasis because when I
but how do you have change without time?
I don't know. I said I actually already said I don't think that it can be. I don't think there's a
Because
way.
I think God's decision to create was always opened up this forever relationship to time, which is part of, I think, the cost, which is why, again, I think, the cross is a picture of creation, because it's a picture of God laying down something of himself for this other thing to come into being. And there's, in a certain sense, this is all related to this loss of participation, because we start conceiving of God as being, the deistic God, the watchmaker God who's at a distance. Is what we've lost in that view is the perspective of a God who is continuously laying down his life for the creation so that it continue to be. So, like, because in some sense, I don't think ontologically it makes sense for us to have our kind of like this separate being that isn't actually fully being breathed into and sustained by God's own kenotic outpouring.
I totally I agree with what you're saying, and again, I will affirm that like there is no rational accounting to be made of either the infinite or eternity. There really isn't.
Yeah.
They're really only things that we can play with apophatically. We cannot give anything that actually is a comprehensible accounting of either of those things.
Yeah.
Like even when mathematicians are talking about like these impossible quantities, they're really using this like abstract shorthand, and none of them actually have any idea of the quantities they're talking about. Let alone true affinity. Even like really big numbers.
Yeah.
Are just beyond our comprehension. We just have no idea what that is. We can't conceive of that. So 100% grant that. What I'm talking about is like, haven't you ever had like the intuitive sense of like a moment, an experiential moment that seems to have the quality of eternity to it? Like,
but okay,
like,
just get
it
a little
seems
more.
It just has this felt sense of like of being like somehow like disconnected from the flow of time. Like you stop in that moment, you stop being aware of the flow of time, and you're kind of just like, you kind of enter into just like an open experience and an open awareness that has a timelessness to it.
Mm-hmm.
I have you ever had that experience?
Oh yeah, I mean,
okay.
But I get it's just I feel like I just feel like eternal is one of these words that like is thrown around. I'm not sure exactly. Now I see what you're saying.
I think what they are, they're words that are trying to describe that this thing that we intuit, right?
Right.
The kind of thing that C.S. Lewis is talking about when he talks about joy and surprised by joy. These kind of like these intuitive echoes of the spiritual world that somehow like we somehow come into contact with.
Yeah,
like,
but I think, but when you say it's eternal, what you're really saying is it has a sort of likeness to a pattern that is eternal, and even the eternal outworkings of that pattern is non-identical repetition. So it's not an exact likeness to it. It's a resonance with it. It's a further continuation of that pattern, but it's also an expansion of it. Like it's a hearkening back to, but also a furthering out of.
Right, and I would say this. I would say this. I would say like if we take the intuitive sense of this, it's definitely like it's probably not. It's not infinite duration, because it doesn't seem to have, those experiences seem to not have the characteristics of duration. Right? They don't, like, duration doesn't seem to be a part of what that is.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Just,
so I think
it's wrong to think about
it's wrong to think about it's definitely, I would say this. I would definitely think that like I would say that I think that thinking about the duration of eternity is probably the wrong idea about eternity.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too many thoughts about time, um, because in my own thinking, it doesn't. I don't I don't consider it. I don't know. I haven't thought a lot about it. I mean, the one thing that comes to mind is the Bible talks about how things occur in the fullness of time. There's moments when um, there's some sort of massive, like this would be a synchronicity on a huge scale. So when the waveforms of phenomena align, and then there's this spike. So I'm an audio engineer, and you can, if you start, like, one of the things you need to watch out for is like when you're combining a lot of signals. So you have all these waveforms, and most of the time it's okay. Everything sort of, there's a rough level. So you're mixing drums, bass, guitar, whatever. But every now and then, like, you'll get what's called a transient from something. But sometimes it'll be like just the multiplication of several things that go whoosh, and you'll even get the negative effect where things cut each other out. So, hey, welcome, Sam.
Howdy. What are we talking about?
Time.
In eternity.
So I kind of think of time in those terms, that it fundamentally, if what's most important is not things, but the relationships, and the relationships are what form the things. These relationships can act in ways that will interfere constructively or destructively. And so, like, in the fullness of time, Christ came and was incarnated. This is a massive, like, universal kind of synchronicity that happened. And like, you can think of duration as just what's before or after or whatever, but in a way, like, what happens with Christ is central in a way that, Christ crucified before the foundation of the world. So, eternity, like, maybe time for us right now is one dimensional, and eternity is a opening up of that, of a multi-dimensional time where you're no longer into sort of a, rather than eternity being the cessation of time, but it's the expansion of it or something.
That's interesting. Yeah, because it just doesn't. I mean, when you talk about relationship, what I hear is there's some dynamic quality. That dynamic quality has to be played out in some sort of sequence of events. What else do you call that but time? And so yeah.
And I mean, like what you're talking about, like it might just be like a requirement for there to be something other than the infinite. Because once you have something finite, like, is it like its finiteness is in many dimensions, and so time is one of those dimensions which is finite. So then it has a progression through that, just like a finite thing has a progression through space, or finite things have a progressive relationship towards each other. Like, I don't know how to conceive of something finite that doesn't exist in time. It's like trying to like imagine something finite that doesn't consist in space.
Right. I think that's okay. So I think what you just said there. So it's interesting that you said that it's impossible to conceive of something finite that doesn't exist in time. But I want to go back to what you said about relation. And what would you say if I were to suggest to you that it might be actually the relation that is the thing that enters into eternity. Because the relation is potentially not finite. The relation itself can be eternal if the relation is rightly ordered.
But elaborate, because here's from my perspective. As soon as the infinite comes into some sort of relationship with the finite, that's a game changer.
Right.
Because and comes into such a committed relationship to
That's what I was.
that
That's
he
when I
sends
said
a part
rightly
of
ordered.
himself into
Right.
it to
That's when I
die
said
for it.
when I said rightly ordered. That's what I was pointing at.
And then
was
the
that-
telos of all this is that somehow him and that creation become one thing. Well, it's never going to be the same that it once was. Whatever was, there's some sort of, I don't know. I don't know. Like there's some sort of process that's undergoing that is along the longest time horizons.
Right.
But
I would suggest that become one because of that relational bond, because the relational bond is the thing that creates the oneness, right?
Mhm.
When you have rightly oriented in a relational bond with the infinite, that relational bond becomes eternal because it's oriented correctly toward the infinite, right? And so that's what's eternal.
Yeah.
But at the same time that there is unity through that relational bond, there are still multiple instances. There are still non-identical repetitions of that relational bond that
Mhm.
define different persons outside of the divine person, which is also relational, and that relationality is also the source of the unity of the divine persons.
I have this idea that someone said once that's been rattling in my head for like 20 years, and I don't know where it fits anywhere. But
that's okay.
But
none of us know where anything fits. We're just guessing, Jess.
This might be like when I heard it, I still don't know if I agree with it, but he was talking about the Father and the Son. So, just like you were talking about, the Father is eternal, ineffable, infinite. The Son is begotten of that. There's a finite aspect to the Son, of the Logos, and their relationship, the infinite and the finite have a relationship to each other, and that relationship is so real that that's the Holy Spirit. And so that's what the Holy Spirit is, the relationship between the Father and the Son.
Jess, had you dropped into the conversation yet earlier when I was actually saying, like, my coffee pot idea this morning when I was making my coffee was that the realness of a thing is determined by how strong its relationality is.
Mm-hmm.
So like that's what makes something really real.
Yeah, I don't know what to think about that. But I mean, like I'm a person, and my wife is a person. We're both people, and our relationship actually turned into a thing called a marriage. And there's times when I'm not necessarily doing things for her. I'm doing things for the relationship. Like I'm actually treating the relationship as a person sometimes. So you behave in ways towards the relationship, and you're not necessarily like the marriage is real.
It is
right, and it creates a unity that is real,
Mm-hmm.
which is why it says the two will be one flesh. It's not. From the biblical point of view, that creates a unity that is very real. So we already know from the biblical text that the Bible takes like relation as a source of unity is very real.
It's interesting. The marriage, like you said, that becomes real, and it has an interesting like ontological status because it is both above the two individuals and it's also kind of beneath them in another sense. And so it's I I know,
Yeah, I don't know
Paul
what to
used
make
to
of
always like to talk about that the marriage becomes its own thing that you could almost give a name to. And yeah, it's just so weird to my, modern materialism that I'm steeped in, to like, well, how do you make sense of that? It is a reality we interact with,
Mhm.
for sure.
See, I don't know if I agree totally with you, Nate, about it being the
Nate
most
doesn't
real
know if
thing.
Nate agrees with Nate.
Well, I know.
I told you it was my coffee pot idea.
I don't know if the marriage is going to like be more real than me or my wife, because I mean, where does the relationship, where do these relationships break
Oh,
down?
no.
I have a
Oh, okay.
relationship inside myself,
I think you
right?
slightly misunderstood what I was saying. Okay. So I'm saying that it creates a unity, but we know that it's a unity wherein multiplicity still exists.
Yeah, because I have a
So
relationship with myself.
what I'm trying to
two sides of my brain, and
point toward is how, like, the biblical language shows us that Trinitarian tension between unity and multiplicity, where it has unity without multiplicity disappearing. So
Yep.
yes, you are still a person and your wife is still a person, and yet through the bond of the marriage, relationally, you are one. So I'm saying that I'm pointing toward this is the right way to think about the Trinity.
mm-hmm.
And for us to think about everything. Actually, I think this sort of like relational ontology is the right way to think about everything, because by extension, that bond, like, that you're entering into in your marriage, that's one of the reasons that the marriage is a sacrament. It's that bond. The nature of that bond is to understand through that marriage, to understand how you are also connected to everything else. Like, God's design is for that relational bond to unite the entire cosmos in his love, which is his substance, which is why he creates, which is how he creates, which is what unites everything in creation.
Well, yeah, that's what unites everything, is love. So love is the glue that holds everything together, and it's ultimately but love, now we're back into all the things that love requires.
Yep.
So in order for things to be united,
Right.
there has to be the possibilities that you talked about, the freedom and the suffering.
Negative freedom, like, because it can't be coerced. It's not love if it's coerced. So there has to be negative freedom, has to exist, or love is not a possibility. And I'm not ready to, like, really seriously argue for this because I don't know how to articulate it. But lately I've had the intuition that suffering is also a precondition for the possibility of love. Now, once love occurs, love is also the thing that has the power to heal all suffering. So it can't come into existence without the possibility of suffering. And yet, at the same time, ironically, it is the thing that heals suffering.
Yeah, it seems like, I don't know how any of this fits, but it seems like suffering is a possibility because it's how things become real.
Right.
Like there's no other way. Like for something to become real, there has to...
It's instructing us about love in some way, because, like, if you look at the nature of the divine love, well, what divine love is, it's the kenotic self-sacrificial love that has the power to create a universe. That's what it is. So how are we going to learn that pattern without experiencing suffering, without there being sacrifice?
Well, now we're into a position where God does sacrifice to himself. But it's not for the redemption. It's not to pay for sin. It's to create the world.
That's right. It's the opportunity cost for world creation.
Well, it's not even the opportunity cost. It's just like there's no other way to create anything without the sacrifice. And then that's how anything real gets made.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is why John Bear talks about the cross being the day of creation.
Yep.
Well, and you think it also, here's the thing about this, when you start thinking about it this way, you can also take the same mode of thought and you can apply it to our subcreative capacity.
Yep.
It has the same exact characteristics. It follows the same pattern.
Yep.
So it
Yeah.
actually does establish that, in this very non-trivial way, it's like, oh, this Trinitarian relational mode of being that creates a universe out of self-sacrificial love is how anything is created. And the more that I am living into that pattern, the more creative I will be.
Yep. This is why the penal substitutionary atonement emphasis that many churches have, that the churches I grew up in have, why are we going that route? Because I feel like that's like a side thing that leads up to this. No, it's the foundation for creation.
Can you get both of those things at the same time, Jess?
Yeah, you can, because the world, we shrink back. Okay, we are called to participate in this creative endeavor. We are called to be like Christ. That involves death. All right. And we don't like that. So we shrink back from this. So we shrink back from our role. And basically we decide we're not participating because we don't know if God's good anymore.
It's actually lazy and easy to say, oh, Jesus did it all for us. Now we can just sit back and wait for Jesus to come back.
So, yeah.
That's easy. That's trivial. Mm-hmm. That actually reduces the power of what the story actually is.
Yeah. And so the shrinking back, we
glad you approve, Sam.
In a Pageauian sense, we add things to ourselves to protect us. We have garments of skin. We build a city. We build a wall. We build protections. We build things physical. We build things psychological. We build things cultural. And all this is dead wood that is keeping us, and this is sin, that is keeping us from participating in that which we were created for. We're supposed to continue the creative process. We're supposed to continue this thing, but it involves death. And so, Christ paying for that, we become a slave then to, we become a slave to death by putting it as the highest thing that we're trying to basically avoid. And
yes.
And because of that, we've become a slave. And this is where David Bentley Hart likes to talk about it in terms of redemption. You pay the price to the slave owner to free the slave. So this is where the penal substitutionary atonement, it's not quite it's a redemption. It's a calling back to your role, because you shrunk back from. It's not punishment. It's not. I mean, there's a price to be paid because of the mistake, but it's not it's not a punish. It's
so Jess, why crucifixion and not just, I don't know, beheading or something simpler and faster?
Or just a stillborn birth.
Yeah.
So I think, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I just had to pipe up here because I'm going to cut back out and just listen. But I think this gets at the point that I think Father John Bear says this a lot, but Jesus is the revelation, the full perfect revelation of this infinite, unrepresentable God. And that sounds like it's a paradox. And so the crucifixion, the incarnation, the crucifixion, the resurrection aren't just, to even think about them as options is to already be on the wrong path. Why the crucifixion? That's a question that's it reminds me of the question, it reminds me of Jordan Peterson's dialogue with Jonathan Pageau, or it reminds me of the book of Job of why. That's the fundamental wrong orientation to God. That is the center of all being, all history, everything that we can know. It's the fullness of revelation. And so when we want to know what God is, we look at Jesus. He is the that's the only way we ever know God, is through Jesus, and not in a critical, historical, scientific, backward looking way, but in the fullness of all time way. And so it's not like it's I don't know, you guys said something that really piqued my interest to want to join in, because it's not, what were you just talking about? Jess, you were just talking about something before Sam said something.
Well, talking about how penal substitutionary atonement shouldn't be the focus, but the creation that we're called to participate in through, because that's what we're called to. We're called to imitate Christ. And then Sam asked me why crucifixion instead of just beheading or some other way of dying.
So I think this is something that comes up a lot. Sherry mentions this. I talk about it. It's central to the Orthodox liturgy, but it's trampling down death by death. John Bayer becoming fully human. It's not, death is the portal to becoming fully human, and in the way that Jesus experienced it. Because, I mean, this gets at, I think understanding Jesus is understanding how all this stuff fits together. So, like time and revelation and incarnation and being and everything that's going on is represented in Jesus. And so what he did is the path toward union with God and being and becoming human. Everything that he did is not, you can't even understand it in a deconstructive way. All you can do is participate in it and mimic it. It's a very Girardian thing. It's that your understanding doesn't come through abstraction and thinking about it in these conceptual terms. Your understanding, it reminds me of that, this is one of the things I was going to say earlier. It reminds me of that book that Sarah has been posting about that I'm super pumped up about, but like The Disappearance of Ritual. Because that is the way that we change how we perceive reality, is we participate in these. Do you guys remember that part? I don't know if you guys looked at that book, but he talks about the difference between this narcissistic inward psychological stuff, and then ritual is actually our participation in something objective. So if you want to understand the objective, you participate in these rituals that help you to see these things as you're supposed to see them, because that's just, I don't know. And the last thing I'll say, I'll stop shutting up, and I'll start shutting up, is it's a morphic resonance thing. It's a Rupert Sheldrake thing. Like, if you want to understand Christ, you have to enter into his morphic field. You're not going to understand it before you participate in his mode of being. Until you live the life that he lived, you're not going to get it. And probably none of us get it until we die. That's kind of the whole point, I think.
Okay, morphic field, Woo Master Luke.
Thank you.
So
I'll just listen. I'll listen to you rebut that, Sam.
Nah, I'm not. I feel I'm in a question asking mode. I have nothing against trampling down death by death. I fully agree that like learning about Jesus is learning about God. Seeing Jesus is seeing God. Those sorts of things. But I still feel like, that all that to say that, the most important thing seemingly that Jesus has to teach us is at the crucifixion, right? I think we could all maybe agree with that that's sort of like the pinnacle of the revelation that we have in Christ is the crucifixion. And so I still feel like there's something left hanging about why Jesus needed to be crucified, like trampling down death by death. Yeah, okay, yeah, I'm fine with that idea. That's really great and all, but it seems like, okay, any death could have done that particularly, seemingly. There's nothing special about the crucifixion that tramples down death by death. Okay, purchasing us from the realm of Satan to the realm of the kingdom of his glorious light. Okay, yeah, so we get ransomed, right? So like, Satan thought that he was getting Jesus, and so he let us go, but then he couldn't actually keep Jesus. So haha, joke's on you, Satan, right? Okay, yeah, okay, I get that, right? But I still feel like that there's that one thing that I like about penal substitutionary atonement is that it does seem to require a maximally awful death, right? Like if you're absorbing the wrath of God, then it does seemingly need to be pretty terrible to do so. Okay. And that is something that I feel like it brings the penal substitution brings to the table.
Sam, it's an excellent question, but I do think at the end of the day, it's probably just a historical accident. Let me ask you this, like theoretically, let's say that the Kairos moment, instead of being in first century Judea, where the punishment for what Jesus was accused of was crucifixion, would what Jesus did by going to his death on our behalf to show us to show us the right path, would it be any less effective if the Kairos moment instead of it 18th century France and he'd been guillotined?
Yeah, and like I think that there are very few things about Jesus' life that we should write off as historical accident, right? That, and especially not the crucifixion. Like, okay, I can imagine other ways of dying that are perhaps very also terrible, right? And so maybe it could have been, I don't know, slow torturing followed by being slowly grilled to death on a low flame fire. Okay, that sounds pretty terrible too. I'm not sure which of those I would pick, but there does seemingly need to be something about the death that's maximally awful for it to fulfill the archetypal purpose that it has. Yeah. And I don't know what to make of that without something like penal substitutionary atonement.
Well, I get at this through Job, and it's not necessarily totally straightforward because it's not right there in the text, but like, so after Job's trials, why didn't God just come up to Job and be like, hey man, good job, you did it. I made this deal with the devil and you passed. Nice work. Here's all your stuff. Why didn't he do that? Well, the reason is there, in the way that I see it, is that well, you kind of have to conceptualize it. Job in the beginning was behind a hedge of protection. Satan makes the accusation, so Job is basically God's favorite person in the world. It's obvious to everyone. Satan can't hurt the infinite, so Satan he devises a plan, a scheme, where he knows what God wants, and he says, God, what Job is doing is not real. His worship, it's not real. His love for you, not real. It's all an illusion. It's an illusion. It's just because you protect him. You're just in control of everything, God. That's all it says. And so so when Job is cast out of this hedge of protection and he loses everything, Job is in a whole new world. This can be like the hedge of protection is a womb, and Job has been birthed out into the world. We're in a new world, and imagine that Job is the first person to do this. I don't know if we can imagine, but this would mean God has protected everyone until this point, and all of his favorites, and that's why they worship him. But now we're into this new world where God says, no, I trust that Job will still worship me and love me, and I'm not going to be in control of it. So God takes his hands off, he lets Satan have his way. Now, if Job stands the test, the world is made new. It's a different world, because now there exists, now there's no argument whether God is worthy of worship, or because he's in control, or if he's actually good. And so why didn't God just come in and say, hey, good job, Job, nice work, buddy? God comes in the storm and basically rages at Job for 4 chapters. Why? Because he wants, if he did come and just say, hey, good job, buddy, and like hit him on the shoulder, how does he know it's real? It's moved beyond, like, already Satan is defeated. But God himself is like, I'm going, sorry, I'm getting choked up. I'm going to make sure this is real. I'm going to make sure that this is not an illusion. And, you know,
I think that's really key. And like, who does he make it real for? He makes it real for Job. I mean, he was already, I mean,
well, it makes it real for
ostensibly God-
everyone. It makes it real
Yeah.
for God, Satan, Job. It makes it real, like, in a very definite sense. And I think it's the same with Christ, even at a greater level. God wants what Christ is doing to be absolutely real. So like no punches are pulled. Like Christ goes through,
The test needs to be as difficult as possible.
Christ has to go through the refining fire and everything has to be burned off. And he's in the pit of hell. And what survives? It's real. And, and then, like, Christ is so real that he even redeems his body back. So like, not only is there a new creation, not only does he give birth to the church, the spear in the side, that's the same thing, Adam's rib being taken out, forming Eve. Christ got a spear in the side, an issue of blood, and that was a creative thing. He was giving birth to the church. But not only that, he died and was reborn into the new creation. And he brought all the old creation with him. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when Sam was asking about why did it have to be a crucifixion, I was thinking of C.S. Lewis talks about, like, we should think about God coming into his creation as like this diver that's stripping off all these different layers. And then he has to dive down to the very bottom of the thing so that he can take something up with him. So
Is your cat purring next to the microphone?
It's not a cat, it's a dog, but she sounds
snoring dog.
Sorry,
she makes guest appearances on Zoom all the time. Yeah, so like there's this necessity to go to the bottom so that he can pull up all things with him.
Yep.
Is what and that is kind of what you're saying in terms of making things real. It's like he's placing that seed into all things by going to the very bottom.
Yeah, and so in my mind, like, there's an aspect, of course you can look at that as a type of punishment, pain for sins, but for me that's like it seems like that's a smaller view of what is happening in terms of the new creation and the redemption of all things. This is a renewal of all things. It's a renewal.
Also, I think you have to look at what Jesus said his own stated goal was, which his stated goal is to show the Father. Like that over and over and over and over and over. And like the disciples never get it. And they're always like, well, show us the Father and then we'll believe. And he's like, guys, I'm doing it right now. This is it. And I think the cross is illustrative of who God is in a deep way that is linked to creation. And I just suspect there's very significant costs undergirding creation that we don't get to see until the other side. And it's the humility of God that sort of keeps it just outside the frame for us to see. But if when we're in those moments of the crucible of the suffering with Christ, it's like I do think we have kind of glimpses into the nature of God.
Yeah. So one of my favorite passages is Philippians 2. Luke and I had a conversation about Philippians 2 way back a while ago. One of my favorite conversations I've had with Luke. And I feel like, oh man, I have a whole bunch of ideas. All right. So like, why are male cardinals red? Red is a terrible color to be if you're a bird. It means everything can see you and you get eaten really easily. So why the heck would a bird ever be as bright possibly red as it could? And it's showing, and it's only the males, right? Because they're doing it to attract the attention of the females. Okay, why in the world would a female cardinal have the hots for a red male? Oh, well, it means that if they are bright red and they're still alive, they must be good at stuff, right? They're good at getting away from hawks. They're good at evading cats. If they're the worst possible color you can be and they're still alive, man, they must be good at all the other stuff aside from being red. And you can only prove that you're good at those things by bearing as high of a cost as you can, by being as bright of a color as you can. So the brighter you are, the more cost you're bearing, and there's no way to, it's a unfakeable test, right? You can't fake being bright red. So it's a true revealing of what's underneath is the price that they're able to bear, right? That's kind of why cardinals are red, and ditto peacock tails, etc. There's a whole bunch of things in nature that are like that are males doing an unfakeable test to prove their genetic worthiness by bearing a terrible cost. I sometimes think like, whatever, I'll mention Donald Trump. All right. So why did so many conservative people who might otherwise have been ill-disposed to a playboy billionaire from New York City, find him to be their man? And I think that he bore a cost of sacrificing his reputation to the elites, right? He was willing to sacrifice what the Democrats thought of him and his reputation in unfakeable ways. And so that proves that he's not on their side, right? He was willing to flirt being called a racist and all of those things. And I think some of Trump's ugliness was part of what proved his worthiness in a certain sense of being loyal to his own side of the Republicans, right? I think that that's sort of the weird dark voodoo of Donald Trump's attraction. And we like that. It doesn't require people understanding this to act on it, right? Okay, so there's red cardinals that bear a terrible cost to prove their worthiness. Donald Trump, by disgracing himself to certain moral sensibilities, proves his worthiness to the other side. And so, what does Jesus do, right? So, who in the world could be worthy to be king of the universe, to sit at God's right hand and to judge the nations, to judge angels, and to, be the omnipotent ruler of all creation for all eternity? Who in the world is worthy of such a thing? How do you find the person? Who's the Arthur that can pull that sword out of the stone, right? It needs to be the ultimate test, right? You need to be the ultimate red cardinal. You need to bear the ultimate thing, and you need to do it willingly, right? And that's what Philippians 2 is about. He did not consider equality with God something to be seized, like Satan does, but he empties himself and is a servant and was obedient to God to the point of death, even death on a cross, right? That's why the even death on a cross, because it's the archetypally terrible death. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and given him the name above all names, and that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, right? And that it's sort of like, and like the book of Revelation has the similar idea. Like God's holding the scroll with 7 seals. Who's worthy to open the scroll? And like John weeps because the angel tells him that there's no one who's worthy to open the scroll. But then like a trumpet sounds, and like, behold, the root of Jesse, the Lion of Judah, you know, et cetera, et cetera. He has triumphed, and then he's worthy to open the scroll. And then all the angels and the saints and the beasts bow down and sing songs to Jesus, right? It's that sort of thing. What's his triumph? He's the lamb who was slain, right? And it's sort of the red cardinal idea, that how do you prove your worthiness to bear the ultimate responsibility of being king of the universe? You know, you have to bear an ultimate cost willingly, or something like that. That's part of my reason why the crucifixion makes sense.
I mean, that for me, that fits just like right into what I feel like that maps into right exactly what I was talking about.
Right. Yeah.
And you know that you bring up Trump, which is
I'm basically saying that Trump is a Christ figure. He's a forerunner. Yeah, that's all that I'm trying to say, obviously.
No, but now we get into the interesting situation of the Antichrist. And the Antichrist figures out this pattern and tries to wield it. And this is where things get tricky, and that's why there's all those warnings about be discerning and all this stuff, because there are similarities in the patterns of Christ and Lucifer. Lucifer gets thrown down from heaven. You know, he basically pays the price for his sin by being cast out, and he's going to go into there are these strange peculiarities that like, you know, in, I don't know where it is, but like Gnostic texts or whatever, but some places they say like Jesus and Lucifer were brothers. And then but all that aside, you kind of get a sense of this with Cain and Abel. And Cain is the older brother. He should be chosen. Lucifer is the angel of light. He's the worship leader. And Abel is the younger brother, but he offers a better sacrifice. And somehow God, maybe God chooses Abel for whatever reason. God has chosen Christ. And there's a sense in which, I'm projecting all kinds of stuff on to Lucifer and Christ, but Cain and Abel, like God chooses Abel, he doesn't choose Cain. What is Cain's response supposed to be when God chooses Abel? Well, Abel's going to can sacrifice on his behalf, and Cain won't have it. He's like, I want to make the sacrifice. And man, I get choked up. He wanted to.
That's really good, though, Jess. That's good.
And you get. Yeah. Anyway, you get the point. There's That's what causes Cain to kill his brother. He wanted to do that. And he wouldn't allow God's chosen to do it for him.
Mm-hmm. And so here's a passage about the Antichrist in 2 Thessalonians 2, and I think this passage is fascinating because it's like the opposite of Philippians 2, right? So this is 2 Thessalonians 2:3. Let no one deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God, right? That sort of self-exaltation thing. And it's like what Peugeot was talking about with that weird music video and stuff like that. Because Satan's not willing to bear a cost.
Well,
right?
even I'm making the argument that Satan wants to bear the cost, and he wasn't chosen. And this gets into the Antichrist rather than, say, just the pure satanic.
Right.
Because the Antichrist wants to do what Christ did, but he will not allow Christ to do it for him. So,
because he won't submit, because he wants the glory. He wants the glory, and he won't recognize that he needs the right priest to do his sacrifice for him.
Well, yeah, and it's almost like God only needs one man. And so that chosen person's gonna be special. He only needs one. He needs one man. He needs one person. And so, you could see how you can be resentful that God didn't choose you. If once you see what Christ has done, the glory he receives, and the creation that he's created.
That's a breakdown in seeing the relational unity, though.
Yeah,
it's an assertion of your. It's a failure to realize that the reason God only needs one man is because, although there are multiple persons, there is only one man. Which is how we actually started this conversation, because that's what Michael was talking about in his Vox, which was like the reason why. And I wish you were here to comment on that, but he's dropped out for the moment. But that's kind of, so we kind of circled back around to what we started with, and I'm really glad, because you brought like even deeper insight into that as because Christ is the source of that unity. Like that is the way, the truth, and the life. It is that relational.
For they are all one in Christ Jesus.
Yeah, but and we even see this pattern worked out. Like once the one guy broke the 4-minute mile, it was wide open for like a bunch of other people later that in the next few years. Like it happens all the time in sports, like especially like skateboarding and snowboarding and stuff.
Yeah.
They're as soon as Tony Hawk did the 900, now there are 12-year-olds doing 900s.
Yeah, as soon as Shaun White does the double cork.
As soon as he does it, he unlocks it for everyone else. And this gets into like Girard's like mimetic theory. Even he's like, Christ paved the way. He showed the way, and like he calls us to imitate him, and also, but he gets the glory because he was the one that opened the way. Go ahead, Luke.
Well, and it's also, I'm going to plug Rupert Sheldrake again. That's if anyone has actually looked into his theory of morphic resonance, this is how it works. And he has tons of examples. Is like a crystal. The first time a crystal is ever formed, a new crystalline structure, it's slow and it's hard and it really has to work to come into existence. But then once it forms, every time it forms after, it's faster and faster and faster. People learn new habits. Rats learn how to navigate a maze to get cheese faster and faster. And then rats from different places in the world who have no genetic connection to them, no geographic lineage to them, learn the same thing at the same speeds that the other rats did. It's morphic fields, transcendent of space and time, which is hugely related to all this. And and it's Christ, the biggest cosmic field.
Right. He unlocks everything. He unlocks death. There was something else I was thinking of, but I can't remember.
Yeah, I think something like what you're saying, Jess, is like, I think that it is, like Jesus and the wine at the wedding, right? Why was the host of the wedding said, oh man, hey, you saved the good, or the wine taster said, oh hey, you saved the good wine for second. Normally people bring out the good wine and then the cheaper wine once people are drunk. You've done the reverse. How delightful. And there's so much in that, right? And there's a lot of stories in the Old Testament where the thing that comes second is actually more important than the thing that comes first, even though the cultural norm is that the thing that comes first is actually most important, right? And you see like Jacob and Esau, and there's a lot of things like that. And I think that's that sort of old creation, new creation thing. And I think that part of it is that, and I'm not quite sure, I'm just like I don't know how full, just speaking theologically, symbolically, like I think that angels, right, were closer to God in the first creation, and humans are sort of below angels, right? Like, for you have made humans a little bit lower than the angels, right? There's that psalm. But in the second creation, we judge the angels, right? The angels are submitted to human beings. I don't know quite what to make of that. I've never been in charge of an angel before, but that I know of. But I think that there's something like Satan is like the angelic rebellion against this. You get to be more important the first time, but then you have to submit the second time, and it's like, no, I don't want to do that, right?
Yeah.
And Jesus is the first human to break into the new creation, and right, he has legions of angels at his disposal. He's the Lord of spirits, right? And I think that Satan is like the angels not wanting to give up their spot or something like that.
Yeah, well, there's something pretty profound that I've talked about with Sherry, where that, like, the sin of Lucifer was like the first sin, like he invented sin, and then he gets cast out from heaven, and however you work it out, it infects earth. There's a sense in which man was created to pay for all of that and reunite everything. Like man was supposed to redeem everything. That was his project. That's why God created him. And I don't know quite what to make of that. Like it's new heavens and new earth, and Christ does it. So there is something to that.
Yeah, actually, like, and I don't think Sam will like this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Michael and Sherry and I have been reading M.O. Bach's book on the Apocalypse of St. John, and in that book, like, he reads the vision of the Lamb in Revelation chapter 4 as a New Testament creation account. So it's like, in light of what you were saying, you can see how, I mean, this is like just kind of intuitive.
Say that again, Nate. Who reads what as a what?
M.O. Bach, in his book on the Apocalypse of St. John, which is kind of like it's a book on, like, in symbolic interpretation of the book of Revelation. He actually makes the argument in that book that the image of the Lamb in Revelation chapter 4 is actually a New Testament story of creation. So when the Lamb comes forth to break the seal, that's actually like the creation moment. So in light of what Jess was just saying,
oh wow, that's cool,
about Lucifer, you can understand where it's like he wanted to be the one. He wanted to be the one that was able to open the seal instead of the Lamb.
Are we talking first or second creation?
Second creation.
I'm talking. Bach says that the first occurrence of the image of the Lamb in Revelation chapter 4 is actually a New Testament account of the Genesis creation story.
Oh.
So he takes the Lamb slain before the foundation of the world quite, like, directly, as like literally the Lamb slain before the foundation of the world. That it is the self-sacrifice of the Lamb that is the possibility for creation and new creation, because it is the principle of creation.
Okay, so that's where I would disagree, because I'm
Yeah,
like,
I knew you.
totally,
I knew you would
I'm
disagree.
totally fine Jesus like being sort of the author of like second creation and the agent of second creation, new creation, full creation.
Right.
But yeah, okay.
Yep.
I won't put you on that too much right now.
No, that's fine. You'll get to hear a more in-depth discussion of it soon. Actually, we were going to talk about it today, but I had an appointment with a retina specialist, and I was dilated, and I couldn't focus on. I wasn't able to read text, and that discussion was going to require references back to the text, and I couldn't actually focus to read out of a book. So we decided this is why we're having this discussion instead.
Yeah. So, like, one thing that I've been thinking about for the prologue of the Gospel of John, right? The in the beginning was the Word, Word was with God, right? You know, chapter 1 of John, is I've been wondering. So, like, the book of John is fascinating, right? Gospel of John, super weird, super fascinating. All of this, like,
Yes, and
symbolic...
actually, on this note, I'm just going to interrupt you just really quick. Like both Father John Bear and Emil Bach have the view that the Gospel of John and the Apocalypse have to be read together because they are like interpretive keys for one another. But anyway, go ahead.
No, I would agree with that. Although I'm going to agree with that to make kind of the exact opposite point of what I think
figured you
were
would.
making. Yeah,
I would be disappointed if you didn't.
You know, and honestly, I don't think what I'm about to say. Like, I think that there could be a Trinitarian version of what I'm going to say, in any case. Even though I think the way that I understand it is in a Unitarian way, is that like the prologue of John, it's doing like, I think it's telling the story of all of creation and telling the story of Jesus's life at the same time. And right, that's like a very complicated thing to do, but it's like the idea of recapitulation, right? Like Jesus reenacts or kind of absorbs or even like magnifies and illuminates all the events of the Old Testament, right? And it's sort of like, it's almost like the idea that the Old Testament was the sort of symbolic raw material that we need to know first. It's like the symbolic prerequisite to really see Jesus as he is, right? Like, oh, you know, he's like the new Moses, right? Moses went up on a mountain, got the law, gave it to the people. Jesus goes up, you know, Sermon on the Mount, gives like the new law to the people, right? And then, you know, all of these Old Testament imagery is like to help us be able to finally see Jesus for who he is. And like Paul in his letters will say, oh, the Jews still read Moses with veiled eyes or veiled faces or something like that, right? It's like the idea is they're still stuck in the old thing, right? They're still stuck in the raw material. They're still stuck in the prerequisite course without seeing that.
Right, because they don't have the interpretive key.
Right, because they don't have the interpretive key to see that actually it was about Jesus. And it's not a condescending thing. It's complimenting the Old Testament. It's not saying the Old Testament is worthless. It's quite the opposite, right? He's saying that the Old Testament was even more important than the Jews realized that it was. But they're still stuck in sort of this kind of, I don't know, more base or earthly way.
It makes it objectively miraculous. Like,
yes,
like,
yeah.
It's like, it's in no way is that an insult to the Old Testament, because it's saying, it's like, here, like, at that point, it's like you have to take seriously, like, this is divinely inspired because it is able to present this pattern that it could not have known because it had not unfolded in history yet. But once that interpretive key is there, because the event has happened in history, now you can go back and read the text and you can see that it was there all along in the text.
And it's the wines, right? There's the first course of wine and then the miraculous new course of wine, which is better than the first course of wine. And Jesus is the miracle that brings about the new and even fuller course of wine. Right? It's not that they were serving crappy wine at the wedding. I'm sure it was perfectly fine.
The only thing the only thing that I'm saying is, and I don't want to necessarily get into an argument about it right now because I can't reference the text to even like give you his argument. But what Bach is just saying is he would affirm everything that you're saying and then saying, and this is also the thing that creates in the first place.
And and this is where it's like, man, I'm like close, but I'm just a little bit different.
Oh, I understand.
Right, and it's like, it's like, you know, in the beginning was the Word, was God. He was in the beginning with God, right? And the beginning is that the Genesis beginning, or is that the beginning of Jesus's life, right? And I think the answer is yes, right? And like there's this like two layer track.
Right, thinking about it thinking about it if in our frame of like linear progression of events in time is just like completely wrong way of looking at it. I would say like something like what like Robert Jensen says about like time being a double helix with Christ as with Christ as its center. Like that's a way that maybe you could approach it.
Right,
that would
right,
make you not have as much problem with that, because it doesn't require that you believe that that Christ has some sort of like pre-incarnate existence, even if he really is even if the Revelation story is an account of Genesis and he is the lamb in that story, you still don't necessarily have to believe that there is like some kind of thing that is there.
Yeah.
Because that only that only becomes necessary if you're thinking in terms of linear time.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Right. And it's like Jesus is the mystery that was waiting to be revealed, that angels long to look into, but is now made known to us. Exactly. Right. It's like God always knew it, right? God always knew the full story, but it was behind a veil, right? And then in the course of time, it becomes unveiled, but only some people have the eyes to see what's actually happened. Like the Jews are still reading Moses with veiled eyes because they haven't been unveiled to see, Jesus in the whole story or something like that.
And we could also suggest, perhaps from the point of view of eternity, God was always a Trinity.
Gotcha.
You got me, but all right, and so that's what. Okay, Nate. but that's what I think that why the prologue of John is so hard to understand. It's because it's like it's like telling two stories at once, right? It's telling the story of Israel up until the time of Jesus, but it's also telling the story of Jesus in his human.
Well, this is why it's believable to me, even though stylistically the books are very different. The thing is like the one thing that's consistent with both the Gospel of John and the Book of Revelation is they're both deeply symbolic and mystical.
Yes.
100%.
Yes.
Like, so that makes it not difficult for me at all to believe the traditional view that they are in fact the works of the same author, even though they have some stylistic differences, which can be explained by differences between genre.
Right. I also think it could be explained like if John really was an Aramaic speaking Jew from, Palestine, and then he moved to, Turkey, to the Greek speaking world. Like if, you could imagine a couple scenarios where he got better at Greek over the course of his life. Like the Book of Revelation is known for being actually pretty low quality Greek, and even almost having like grammatical errors.
Yeah, and like some people actually think it was possibly translated from Hebrew.
Right. Or you could imagine it was written by a non-native speaker. Right. I actually think that's a pretty good explanation. You could imagine John early in his life when he's like good enough at Greek, but still, it's like a non-native speaker. It comes out kind of rough and choppy. And then either over the course of his life, he gets better at Greek by the time he writes the gospel, or he wrote the gospel sort of with a committee and with helpers who are better at Greek. Right, both of those two things I think are very imaginable.
Although you do have the problem with the fact that Revelation is supposed to have been written at the time of his exile, when he was older. So that would kind of. So I think maybe it having been written in Aramaic or Hebrew and translated into Greek, especially given the fact that it's a deeply mystical, symbolic text, that's going to be a difficult translation. That to me fully explains it.
Yeah. I agree. I don't have too much problem attributing them to the same author.
Yeah.
I did want to share something kind of going back to I posted I can't share my screen, but I posted it in the chat. It's the God fishing picture if you haven't seen it.
Okay.
Can I share it on the screen?
I'm having trouble getting access to it.
Oh, well, let me see if I can.
I have to like that. Oh my.
Anyway,
firewall.
what got me thinking about it is your comments about the robin kind of being bright colored, and this is like a problem because predators can see it easier and stuff. And there's a sense, like even in the story of Job, like Job was drawing attention, and even at the beginning, like he lived in the land of Uz and he wasn't in a city. There were two people groups on either side of him, two pretty large organized people groups that had armies that ended up taking his stuff after he wasn't protected anymore. But he like grew big and wealthy, like in the middle of nowhere, and like, why didn't someone come take his stuff earlier? Like, he was kind of protected, but because of all his wealth and stuff, he was a focus of attention. And so like, and there's kind of like God almost kind of did that on purpose. But the picture is a picture of God, and he's holding a fishing pole, and then down the fishing pole there's actually portraits of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 men, and that's the line of David. And then Christ is at the bottom, and he's on a hook, and then Leviathan is down below, and the hook is piercing Leviathan's jaw. Let me share. So you can see this, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so there's the line of David, there's God the Father, there's Christ on the hook piercing Leviathan's jaw. And the interesting thing is to think of, well, not only Job, but Christ as bait.
Yeah, it works with a ransom theory, right?
Yeah.
That there was something deceptive almost, right? That Satan was tricked and he took the bait.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing about even the book of Job, because you're like, why did, people ask the question like, why is God such an idiot to take Satan up on this bet? And they don't realize that God led Satan right into his trap, so to speak, in order to get to this next level of world. He needed the accusation and the motivation in order to orchestrate something to have a better world. And it's the same sort of thing, I think, with Christ, that why was the crucifixion so public and so painful? And why? Well, part of it, like, Jesus had to be, think of him like a fishing lure. It's got to be kind of flashy and to attract the beast. And it's kind of an ancient conception, but you're right into the old creation myths. But
Do you know what when that image was created? Do you know is it a?
It's in the Hortus Declari. Can't pronounce it.
You know what century?
I want to say the 15th, but
okay. So it's like a Renaissance era, and then.
Oh no, 12th century.
Oh, okay, so medieval.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was. I think it was made by a bunch of nuns.
Oh. Yeah.
At the Hohenberg Abbey.
Gotcha.
In somewhere.
I was in Sweden a couple years ago, and in a park in Stockholm, there's a statue of Thor pulling up the sea monster. I forget what the Norse name for like the mega sea monster is, right? And he's got his hammer in his hand, and I
think it's Nithog.
Could very well be. I couldn't even say if that's right or wrong. And I just remember the statue, right? Thor's got his hammer up, and he's like about to, he's caught the fish, and he's about to strike the death blow with his hammer. And I think I read the myth that he takes some giants fishing with him because they're having a banquet and they ran out of food, so they go fishing to go get more food for their banquet. the giant is too scared of the sea monster getting in the boat, so he cuts the line, and the fish, the evil sea monster fish, gets away before Thor is able to crush its head, or something like that. And it sort of reminds me of that same sort of idea.
Leviathan gets away at the end of Book of Job too.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
But it's like, it's like those myths know they aren't quite the real thing yet. They haven't quite figured out what's the answer.
But it's interesting. It's interesting.
How do we actually kill the fish?
But it's really interesting that it's supposed to be taken to the hall for the feast, though.
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting.
There's old Christian tradition. I forget where it is, but or maybe it's Jewish, old Jewish mysticism that says that at the end of the age, God will kill Leviathan and serve him up at a banquet table.
Yeah, Leviathan, yeah, will be, yes.
There were two Leviathans, a male and a female, and he killed one. I think he killed the male, and then he'll kill the female at the end of the age.
Yeah.
Something strange like that.
Is Leviathan supposed to be linked to just chaos generally, or is it supposed to have some link to the devil? Like, what's the connection?
Well, I mean, obviously there's some sort of connection to chaos and potential.
Yeah, it's definitely like,
and
it's destruction. Not, I mean, it may also refer to like an actual like literal creature, but it clearly has like a eschatological kind of meaning too. It definitely is like a monster that is associated with evil for sure.
Well, but what's interesting Leviathan shares an etymological link to Lotan, which is the one in the Mesopotamian creation myth,
right,
or the Babylonian, I forget.
Right.
And Lotan was the one that was killed to create the world. So there's that. But the interesting thing, what happens in the Bible is like normally it's like the one God versus Lotan, and the one God conquers Lotan to build the world.
Right. I'm glad you brought this up. I'm really glad you brought this up, because in these old mythological stories, there is always a sacrifice at the beginning of creation in every single mythological system. The thing is, it's a brutal sacrifice, right? Which links, you brought up Gerard briefly earlier. This links to Gerard, right? Where it's like, so there's this, pagans know that sacrifice is the cost of things cohering together, right? Of creation too. But the thing is that the sacrifice that those stories point to is a brutal, violent sacrifice, whereas the Christian story points toward a loving self-sacrifice, and totally inverts it. Well,
and not only that, but Yahweh puts himself above Leviathan and actually says, "This is my greatest creation," and he's proud of it.
Right.
And so this also fits just the darkness of the storm that God arrives in. Like there's some brilliant spots, bright spots, but there's also like he ends his whole thing with that whole speech about Leviathan, and he. It's like it is the darkness of God that sort of made manifest in some way, but it's towards something glorious. I don't know. It's hard to explain, because it's like, I don't know. It's just so.
There was an interesting archaeological discovery that came out today. Saudi Arabia, I think, is one of the most underexplored archaeological places on Earth, because it's been, a pretty reclusive, repressive, place
right.
for a long time, for most of the modern archaeological period. But there's a ton of important historical stuff, right, in Saudi Arabia. And right. So, like, the new crown prince or whatever is, slightly more liberal on archaeological things. So there's a lot of stuff coming out of Saudi Arabia recently. And so there's all of these, like, stone squares, or something like that in northwest Saudi Arabia. It's like, it's Midian, really. It's where Moses goes when he's running, away, and where he meets his wife, and etc. Right? It's that neck of the woods. And there's all these stone squares on top of mountains, and they're like, what the heck are these things for? Right? Was it a pen for animals? Well, the walls aren't high enough, and why would you put a pen for animals on top of mountains? And so they did some, more archaeological research, and well, what in the world do you put on top of a mountain? A altar, right? There's all these bones of burnt cows and sheep and stuff. It's like, oh, these were religious altars, and why they're on high places, right? And they're super old. They're like 8,000 BC or something, some of them. And like lots of the oldest things that we have, right? And there's like that temple thing in southeastern Turkey that's one of the oldest, large human buildings, and it's a temple altar sacrifice place, right? And some of the oldest buildings in Saudi Arabia, what are they? They're altar sacrifice places, So it's like, what in the why in the world do all of these different cultures have sacrifices, right? The Spanish show up in the Aztec kingdom and they're sacrificing animals and humans, right? Missionaries go to some remote island in the South Pacific. What are they doing? They're sacrificing animals and humans, right? It's like, what in the heck is with that? And I think that Peterson and Gerard are like some of the only people who like really seem to be taking that idea seriously. And Peterson tried to get Sam Harris to take it more seriously, and Sam Harris was just like, bah, silly superstitious nonsense, right? And it's like, are you sure?
Right. He just takes the reality that we have that became possible after Christianity, and just assumes it's just the default, I guess it's like, well, they're just barbarians and they were primitive and we're much better now because progress.
Yeah.
I mean, that's his level of thinking about it. Yeah. So yeah, I don't really think he entertained it with any seriousness to begin with.
Yeah, and David Bentley Hart has in his book Doors of the Sea, he has a line that says that nature itself is sacrificial. And we even talked about the robin. We talked about like even the nature of how things become. It's always through some sort of struggle, sacrifice. It's in its attempt, the lion trying to be the most of a lion it can endures all kinds of hardships, and even evolution is a sacrificial system. And so it's just like people intuited the pattern, and in a Girardian way, it works. Right. At least in a Girardian way, if not more ways.
Or it did work.
Yeah.
Do we really think that like prehistoric man just intuited the pattern, or like, I don't know?
I think it's even deeper than that, right? It's almost like innately got wired to need to act that out, or something like that. And that's why it's like so appealing. It's like, it's not just like, oh, we learned how to make soda cans, right? It's like we weren't innately predisposed to know how to make soda cans, but we seem innately predisposed to like think that sacrifice makes some bizarre, dark, intuitive sense.
Well, look how many species like die in order to procreate.
Right. But it also seems like
it's definitely just like part of the pattern of reality, I think.
Well, it's the imitation of the logos, the pattern that's
what I would say.
Logos takes, and this is what I like this idea, is that like God loves His Son so much that He just wants more of it. Like that's how excited He is about His Son, and how much He just wants a world full of logi. Of more things trying to.
Yeah, He wants the entire cosmos to be conformed to it. That's exactly it.
And when it participates in that pattern, He's just joyful and happy. And this is, you get these weird images in the Bible of like the blood will be turned into wine, and for the end of the age, and what is it like? They'll be trampled down in the wine press, their bodies, and the blood will pour out. Well, like that. There's God drinks the wine and is intoxicated by it. So there's this weird like this is obvious in like pagan stuff, but you still get some of this imagery, like the sacrifice that Christ made. God loves so much that he just wants the whole world to participate in it. And
because it is the thing that it's the thing that creates the possibility for ongoing creation.
yeah,
This
because
is the reason, because God wants creation to continue. It is the thing that is the possibility for creation and life, and God wants more creation and life, which is why he's so in love with it, which is why he wants it to expand and to encompass the entire cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and then
so
yeah, go ahead, Michael.
I was just gonna say, like, in terms of like prehistoric man just intuiting this stuff, I don't know. It just seems to me like it seems like it's more than that. And we were talking about like, this idea that maybe creation, or specifically creation of man, is intended to be salvific of angels in some way. It seems like clearly, like, all the old books have very clear ideas that, like, there was some weird interaction between these beings and people back in the day. Even the law of Moses was supposedly brought down through angels, and I don't really understand how
Right.
you get that from the text.
well, without
either.
without even appealing to anything like that, which I would be inclined to agree with, but without even appealing to anything like that, you can, like, okay, so it's like, are humans really human in any proper sense before they have developed a religious sensibility? Is not a religious sensibility like a prerequisite for humanity that we'd recognize as humanity?
Yeah, but I mean, it's interesting. Like, even like, in the Cain and Abel story, like, they're already sacrificing. Why? There's no law of Moses. Like, what?
Right.
It's just kind of assumed that that's what you do.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think there's something going on there.
But
that,
I just think it's like you're participating in the logos. You're participating in the pattern that the logos acts out to create and renew things.
Right, and to be human is to be able to intuit. Even if you don't have the ability to, like, abstractly reason about it, it at least means, at the very least, that you have the ability to intuit that pattern and participate in that pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Even
you
if-
bring it in,
if
your mind-body interaction, right?
Right.
Pattern gets into your mind gets into your actions, and then actions into the world.
And I think the reason that we had to pass through, like, with a phase of withdrawal or participation, is because of the need to alleviate confused participation. Like, we had to be able to gain enough wisdom and discernment to participate properly. But
Yep.
we're still called to participate.
I think you kind of see the pattern of like how Adam did that when he named the animals. And I get a lot of this from Pajot because it's not necessarily right there in the text, but like Garden of Eden is on a mountain, and either Adam goes down the mountain to the animals, or at least when you go to the animals, you're going to a lower thing. You're going to something, because the animal part of the world. And then he names them. So this is his participation. So there's a sort of going down the mountain or out from the center and then returning. And after he's, so his going out and down to the animals, naming things, and then coming back, that's the U-shaped journey. That's the hero's journey. So Adam is practicing this journey. And, when you leave home, now how it ties back into sacrifice, like, but
Well, I would say
I see Adam doing that before the fall, this U-shaped journey thing.
Well, it does tie back to sacrifice, because I think that we're asked to like, we're not to sacrifice in terms of a blood sacrifice, but we're asked to, like, we're still asked to sacrifice on behalf of the animals, because if we are assuming our mediating role in creation properly, a good chunk of what our purpose is to help to elevate that which is below us in the hierarchy.
Right.
Just as we are to be elevated ourselves by proper reference what is above us.
Right,
Right.
and
Because
I'll,
that's how
I'll
you-
completely stampede on my Protestantism right now and say that, you know, like the Eucharist is that, right?
Yep.
You know, Jesus
Yep.
does the once and for all sacrifice, and then the Eucharist is the re-celebration, the redoing, the re-bringing, you know, the spreading that sacrifice out across space and time in our, you know, church celebrations. And that is sort of the participation of the body of Christ and the principality of sort of Jesus's sacrifice at work.
Right. That's because Jesus is showing us the pattern of being, which is communion. Like that is what it is.
Yep, and God brings the wine. He himself paid for it.
You make God sound so much fun.
He does. Like I mean, it really is like the story of the prodigal son.
Right.
Like-
Yeah. I love
Like,
that. I really love
the
that.
prodigal son is the one that goes out and then
Right.
comes back and does the
Right.
journey. The older brother stays there and just gets resentful. And
Right.
you know, even though the prodigal son sins in his journey, he misses the mark. He still comes back, and his father is able to rejoice and throw a party. And the older
With
brother,
the sacrificed animal.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the
yeah.
At the feast,
sacrifice.
there's the feast that eats the sacrificed
Yep.
animal.
And then the older brother, he has this desire in his heart because he says, "Father, why did you kill the fattened bull for him? You wouldn't even let me have a goat with my friends." And the father says, "You didn't even ask. You should have asked. I would have given it to you. I would have sacrificed the bull for you. You didn't ask." And you know, the son makes the error. Instead of asking for the party, he asks for his inheritance. And you know, but the father gets his party anyway.
Yeah. All right.
Because right, doesn't it say that in the doesn't the father say, "Let us sacrifice the animal, sacrifice this fatted calf"? I'm just
Yeah, he says, "Bring the fattened calf. My son is alive. He was dead, now he's alive."
They celebrate it. Yeah. Anyway, whatever. Close enough. I'm gonna go with they
Yeah.
sacrifice it.
They did. They killed the fattened calf.
Yep. All right. Well, that's I think that's a good note to end it on. Thanks everyone for coming to
Thanks
this
for
little
hosting.
spontaneous conversation, and
Thanks, Nate.
really appreciate everyone's contributions. And I'll link the raw video to everyone. Actually, Sam, I don't know if I have. If you could like maybe
I'll put my
email so I
email
can
in the
send it to you?
box. Yeah.
yeah, you can do that. Okay, great. All right, talk to y'all later.
Hey guys,
Hey, Luke.
I
Oh, you got a last minute contribution here, Luke.
have a last note to tell you guys.
Okay, we'll let you have the last word. Tentatively, depending
Okay.
on how good it is. Like, I might reserve the right to
Okay.
go for it.
Love you guys. Great conversation.
Oh,
I wasn't involved much, so that really improved the quality and the
no,
intelligibility.
no, I don't agree with that. I think it would have been even better for you to have been here.
Mhm. Oh,
Yeah.
that's sweet of
Yeah.
you. Okay,
Yeah.
love you guys. That's all.
All
I
right,
wanna
love
say.
you too.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.